Well, it's Thursday when we are recording this live, and welcome Althea friends and family. It's Dr. Jonathan. I am the spiritual director, and I don't know what else you would call it, but I help run the Althea Center with an amazing team of people, including Susan, who is here with us as our moderator. I like to call her our general manager, although she is, I think, formally our marketing and business manager. If you're watching this, a big shout out to Susan. And by that, I didn't mean if Susan's watching this, I meant if you, someone else, if you're watching this, you can say thank you to Susan because she helps make all these wonderful online things possible. Now, our Thursday program is different than the the Sunday experience that we offer. So if you're familiar with Althea, Sunday is our community gathering. And every Sunday, until we're back in person in our building together, we will be doing this live on Althea Center Denver. That's our Facebook page. If you're hearing this, you're probably already there. Sundays, we start with a meditation, and then we do a prayer, typically some readings, and I give a message. It's about an hour, usually finishing a little bit earlier, and then a bit of time for questions if there's anything urgent, and that is 10:30 a.m. Mountain Time. We are really hoping to grow this, not only because we want to serve our Althea community and keep people connected, excuse me, but we also want to reach out to other people wherever they may be, just to provide a different way of looking at our situation, a spirit-centered way of looking at what the world is facing and going through today. So on Thursdays, however, we actually hold this Thursdays at 11 because it's in, excuse me, I was just out walking my dog, which is a legal outdoors activity, and it's getting cool here in Denver, so that's why I'm a little bit flush and coughing. But Thursday takes place at 11 a.m. Mountain Time USA, when we used to have our Explorations gathering. And Explorations is just this wonderful drop-in group that we would have in person. And we would share a different theme each week. I would talk for about 20 minutes. We'd do a little breathing together at the beginning, and then we would go around the room and share. So we can't quite do that on this setting, but I'm trying to make Thursdays more about questions and answers and dialogue. So if there's things on your mind that are coming up because of what we're facing and seeing in the world today, whether it's a very personal question about something you're facing and struggling with, or whether it's a more philosophical question about some broader topic, bring it on. You can send that in to a Facebook post, and then Susan will translate it to me, and then I will read it for you from my iPad and answer the question. Well, without any further delay, I'm just trying to buy some time to get people situated. Let's take a deep breath. Let's get quiet. Let's get centered, and let's begin. So I'm going to invite you to sit comfortably but alert, and then let your eyes close, or if it helps you, you can look down. So breathing deeply in through the nose, down into the belly. Feel yourself growing quiet. Let your mind grow quiet. If it's still chattering and busy and full of questions, let them be, but move your awareness from the mind through the emotions, witnessing it all, and finally settling down into the quietness that we all carry. And regardless of what you hear around you or the chatter within you, feel the stillness. Let your body soften, The muscles in your face relax, your shoulders drop. And when you return to this quiet center point in yourself, think of it as returning home. And from this place, your heart expands. There is enough love for everything. From this place, the mind moves to a vast, vast, eternal perspective. And all things that we face become smaller, more curious, more beautiful in this peaceful, vast light. Taking your time, just enjoying the silence, enjoying the stillness. And I'm going to read a poem. So I invite you to stay in your quiet, in your connection. This is another poem by Hafiz called Laughing at the Word Two. Only that illumined one who keeps seducing the formless into form had the charm to win my heart. Only a perfect one who is always laughing at the word two can make you know of love. So when you're ready, you can open your eyes and come back to our gathering here. I've got my iPad ready, so if anyone has comments or questions as we go, or for whatever is coming next, please send them here on Facebook, and then I'm going to have Susan transcribe them and send them to me right here. So, Susan, are you ready? Send me a message. I'm ready, and I'll see it here. I got a hair. So, the theme that I was feeling compelled to talk about today, and oh, I see Scott from Florida. Hey, Scott, happy to see you. Is the topic of innate radiance or internal radiance. Now, this is a theme that we actually find in many traditions. And again, we have to be careful that we don't say that all religions and all cultures are the same, because they do have radical differences and they do feel very different for different people. And so we can't just sort of wash them all together and say they're the same. On the other hand, we can say that there is something about the human condition and the human experience of spirituality that is universal. That inside those different containers, inside those different paths and traditions, the lived human experience converges on things that are very much universal. So regardless of whether the door was Buddhist or Christian or Jewish or New Thought or indigenous, there are certain places that we can go as people, as humans, that are common to all of us. So you may remember in some of my more recent posts that I have been reminding us of the three dominant dimensions of being, the spirit self, or what I'm starting to feel more comfortable calling the spirit system, the soul system, and the self system. So again, quick reminder, the self system is this dimension of you that is very much this world. It's earth business, it's family conditioning. Some of it can be very authentic and reflecting your soul. Some of it can be very disconnected and full of habit and addiction and control and judgment. But there is a self system, and this is the system you use to interface with the material world. It's the system you use to manage and engage energy. Then we have the soul system. The soul system is your thoughts, feelings, language, perception, talents, and impulses that arise from your innate personal expression of spirit. You could call it true self, or you could call it soul, and it's something that ultimately transcends this particular life. And yet, when we talk about being true to ourselves or authentic, the soul system is what we are operating from. But finally, and this is what I want to spend some time on for a little while now, but finally, there is an innate place within the self that is as spirit, operates as spirit. It is the universal place inside the personal experience, inside the personal container, the culture, the family, the pandemic. This is considered the ground of being, the source, energy, consciousness, existence from which all things arise, to which all things return. And of course, in any moment, if we open our hearts and minds, if we create alignment between self system, soul system, and a willingness to open to the spirit system, we can experience it directly. Now, obviously, we are all very much preoccupied with the self system. How do I survive? When's this going to end? Do I have enough toilet paper? Why are those people standing so close to me? We are also very much connected to our, Linda from Arizona, hey. We are also very much connected to the soul system if we've been on a spiritual path. And then we use words like authenticity, alignment, personal truth, personal gifts, and so on to access a fuller experience of who we are. The tricky thing about these two first dimensions that we're talking about is that they are still very much filtered, or can be very much filtered, through a dualistic consciousness. In other words, if you are not tapped into the spirit system, and you are simply operating from soul or self, or the integration of the two, which of course is ideal, we can still get locked into preferences. And when we get locked into preferences, we are caught up in attachments. When we're caught up in attachments, then we fear letting go. And the more fear we have, the more attached we become. And when we face a time like what many of us are in right now, facing a pandemic, I'm trying to think, the stay-in orders and the kind of social lockdown where many of us feel that our sense of control and freedom is being taken from us. In these kinds of situations, we can find extraordinary opportunity to consciously and, frankly, unconsciously move to the polar extremes of our being. So if you have a history of trauma or isolation or abandonment or any one of those wonderful human experiences, it's not very difficult to see this as a bad time and to feel stress and worry exacerbated as we wonder about our safety in the future. This is all typically rooted in the past. However, we also have the opportunity, and this is certainly what I think I talk about every time I speak in public, every time we gather on Sundays, every course and class, every 12 at 12, whatever you find me doing, the core message is that at the very heart of who we are is an innate wholeness, an innate radiance. And this is talked about in some typically more esoteric, more mystical communities within all the world's traditions. So yes, whether it's Muslim or Jewish or Hindu or whatever, Confucius or Native, you will always find those great teachers and masters who have committed so deeply and personally to their cultural path, but without ego, with heart, and with surrender, and with openness to the spiritual world, that they fall into an entirely new or different experience of consciousness. In this experience of original consciousness, the distinct feeling is that it is not new at all. The distinct feeling, and if you read William James's classic book, The Varieties of Religious Experience, where he does an inventory of the qualities of these numinous, oneness, mystical experiences, one of the hallmarks is the distinct feeling that what you are encountering in such moments is the ultimate nature of reality, the true ground of being from which everything else arises. There is an implicit feeling of eternal permanence. There is an implicit feeling of omniscience, omnipresence, and more so, as we enter that deep original consciousness, we lose so many of the faculties and senses that arise and are, you might say, symptoms of the soul system and the self system. Which is why in the variety of religious experiences and other evaluations of mystical states over time, we see the word ineffable surface again and again and again. That the great teachers and masters have said that when you enter this place of deep knowing, deep union, deep connection, you lose the impulse to discern. You lose the capacity to differentiate. You enter a place that the mind can only lead you to, but cannot follow. You enter a place that the heart expands completely and totally to contain all that is, and then even the heart surrenders the journey of awareness to something further and more. And that something further and more is, for these masters, these traditions, spirit, consciousness, existence. It is innate love and wisdom, and it is innately complete. When you are in that place, the world, no matter what is going on, economic crisis, pandemic, family disaster, no matter what's going on, this aspect of who you are knows that everything will be okay in the end. It doesn't mean we won't have pain. It doesn't mean that everything is fair. It doesn't mean that everything is what we would call good. But it does mean that everything is passing. No feeling is final. That all that we are experiencing is but a passage as the soul evolves and our consciousness rests, resides, remains rooted in something eternal and untouchable. So, from that place, what we really need to do now is talk about what does that mean for us today. And it's tricky because to be quite honest, over the years, no matter how mystical, no matter how spiritual, no matter how much about consciousness, mindfulness, non-duality, anything I present might be, I would say the 80-20 rule persists, which is that ultimately about 20% of the people listening are truly, deeply invested in that journey of awakening to the lived integrated experience of oneness. And perhaps 80% are comfortable enough to know that that is real, to feel that that is true, but return to questions of daily comfort, daily coping, and how do we simply move through this life with some measure of peace and equanimity, power, and self-advocacy. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about how oneness and the radiant core of being actually helps in a pandemic or actually helps in a relationship. Now, I'm sort of moving toward, I'm warning you, I'm moving towards the end of my comments. And so I would encourage you, if you have questions about what I'm saying, or comments about what you're going through, or questions about what you're going through, please post them now, and we will get to those questions shortly. So, the best way to describe this, I suppose, is to say that most of life and what we experience is an issue of identity. Awareness, as you know, amplifies whatever it focuses on, whatever it fixates on, right? So energy goes where attention flows, something like that. Energy flows where attention goes, same thing. So if we are fixated on stuff and survival, then stuff and survival issues gain power, and they grow. They grow in our awareness, they grow in their dominance of our choices and our worldview, and they actually activate parts of our brain and body that predispose us to more worry and more fear. In other words, if you're seeing everything competitively, I had to adjust my power cable. So if you see everything comparatively and competitively, then that absolutely engages that competitive fight, flight, freeze response of your limbic reptilian brain, which means that you are going to see things in terms of polarities, divisions, sides, who is safe, who is not, who is like me, who is not, who is on my side, who is not, and what is fair and what is not. So if you're looking for any kind of indication about where your head is really at day to day as you go through this experience, pay attention to those kinds of me versus conversations in your mind, right? Me versus the world, me versus them, me versus myself, where there is judgment, a desire for control, or an evaluation of fairness. We have typically lost our root temporarily or more dramatically in the more soulful or spirit self. On the converse, when we go to an extreme and we engage the spirit self first, when we wake up in the morning, when we're facing a difficult decision or a feeling of panic, when we return again and again and again to that still silent center, it creates a greater context. It creates a greater perspective in which we begin to cultivate spaciousness, objectivity, so that we can look at the feelings and thoughts that are arising and then make intentional, intuitive decisions about whether we want to feed them or not, whether they're valuable or not, and where they're going to take us. The other thing that's absolutely critical about the value, the practical value of being connected to the spirit system within, the spirit self, is that it is innately loving and self-accepting. And at the heart of most of our issues of judgment, control, fear, and survival is a lack of self-love. The presence of some shame, a feeling of not deserving, and by allowing those things to persist without creating distance, without examining them, it becomes very difficult, even to embrace the consciousness of oneness, the consciousness of spirit, because making time for ourselves is not a priority. Slowing down and feeling whole feels too decadent. And so rather than embracing silence, space, time, and listening to the living energy universe that we are a part of, we fall into boredom. We fall into judgment. We forget that we are a direct expression of this living energy universe. It's definitely a silly analogy, but the sort of metaphor that I sometimes think about, but I don't often share, is that it's kind of like a puppet show. And the puppet that you have on your hand is the social self that you show the world, right? You've chosen this character, this voice, this costume. You've committed to it. And there's a certain static quality of it, right? It thrives on normalcy because it can't reveal that below the surface someone else is animating it, right? So it's always the same, like Kermit the Frog, right? It's always looking the same. It's always sounding the same. Or Ernie and Bert, or I don't know, Topo Gigio, whatever puppets you've got as your reference point. In many ways, that is like your external-most social self. And the problem is that we too often feel that that puppet must cater to the viewer. The puppet must cater to the script, and that if we are going to continue to dignify the puppet, then we must believe that it's real, and in some cases even allow our identity as spirit to blur or be lost, as though the puppet were actually real. And it's hard to feel that it's not, because our daily experiences of body, mind, and emotion are so potent, so powerful, so compelling. But truly that is only so that the spirit has a mechanism, a vehicle to engage life and energy in this world. We are energy beings in a living energy universe. So yes, the mind, the body, the emotions, they feel potent and powerful. But we go back to the puppet analogy, and you must remember that whatever you are showing the world is a choice. Whatever that voice is, whatever that costume is. And ultimately, you have the ability to go beyond it. You can take the puppet down. When we have times of retreat and solitude and quarantine, that is precisely the moment to take that social face, that puppet down, and change it. Dress it up. Give it a new color. Give it a new voice. Try out something new. Be playful. Be creative. This is the time to set down whatever no longer serves you. And I'm going to tell you this. And I'm continuing because I see no questions. I'm going to tell you this. Remind yourself every single day, as long as this self-quarantine, state quarantine, social quarantine continues, that how I hold myself through this is how I hold myself in the world. What's going on now is the real me. So if you're at home going cuckoo bananas saying, this is not really me, I'm normally a very peaceful person, I'm a normally very nice person, I'm normally not binge eating ice cream and cursing at the government, well, probably you are. In many ways, when we go on retreat or into solitude or quarantine conditions, the idea is to physically create a living metaphor for the experience of dropping the socialized self and moving into the eternal self. Does that make sense? Or maybe more accurately, moving into the soul self. So that means that you want to use every day until things go back to normal, air quotes. You want to use every day to explore what it means to be human, what it means to be you, and what it means to put your relationship to spirit first in everything. Have you sanctified your experience? Do you pray every morning and welcome the spiritual world into your lived experience of the day? Do you ask God to be with you and guide you as you go through the day? Or angels, or ancestors, or departed loved ones? How do you invite the spirit world to be in your space? This is what makes sacred retreat. This is what makes divine isolation. It's inviting spirit in to be with you, to fill the emptiness of your home, your apartment, whatever you have. Wherever there is not busyness, there is isness. And wherever there is isness, there is the primordial spirit of life, radiant and abundant. Just in the same way, we're all hearing these stories about nature reclaiming, right? Pollution in cities visibly dropping. Even today when I was able to get out and take my dog for a walk, I noticed that there was a place in this sort of natural little forest near our home where there were more birds out than I'd ever seen in 4 years. And that, I think, is because today we were the only people walking dogs or I was the only person walking a dog for quite some time before I saw someone else. In other words, God can't enter our consciousness where we are filling it with ourselves, with our own busyness, with our own ego, with our own preferences. An empty house, an empty schedule, an empty life is the most beautiful thing that you could possibly have if you learn to be grateful for it, to sanctify it by inviting spirit in, and then find some practices throughout the day. Maybe it's some time doing yoga. Maybe it's some time doing Tai Chi, Qigong. I mean, this is the time to do it. If you're watching me now, then in an hour you can find a free Tai Chi class and do Tai Chi. Notice the experience. Feel your energy body. Feel the subtle energy. You can sit and dialogue with whatever guides you. You can listen for the vibrant, crowded, spiritual world that is ever present all around us, and yet constantly ignored and overlooked because we are so distracted. Just the way nature floods in and fills any space we give it, so too can spirit. And if you are someone who is, so to speak, trapped alone, though it may not be your nature, though you may even be extroverted and you feel you need to be with people to be whole, I'm telling you, it's not true. That is the story of the puppet. That is the story of the self system, the soul system. But you are not alone. You are never alone. And you will never discover your profound interconnection and camaraderie with life itself more than when you're alone. And that is why saints, mystics, sages, shamans, for thousands of years, without exaggeration or exception, have created conditions of quarantine for themselves willingly, so that they could restore life to its natural order. Spirit first. Listening, receiving, and engaging the contemplative practice. So on that note, it's almost 11:40, and we'll go probably about another 15 minutes or so here. Probably in a week, I'm going to guess next week, I will be doing a class on, right now we're calling it Saints and Shamans Discover the Divine Qualities of Quarantine. And for 90 minutes, I will lead a Zoom call, so you'll be able to be there, and we'll be able to see each other and ask real questions in person. And we'll talk in more depth about how do we, who maybe have never trained in monastic traditions, maybe never trained in true shamanic traditions, how do we sanctify and transform our experience of what's going on? We are looking for your feedback. Susan posted a survey on Facebook. Susan, I know this is a very last-minute request. Maybe you can pop that up right now into the comments and questions for this session. But you can also just answer directly. We'd love to know what time of day is best for this kind of a session. Now this would be a smaller thing. This would probably be a paid session. Althea definitely needs some income. Donations are always welcome, and we have links on our website. But when do you want to get together? I mean, if we're all at home, is it morning, afternoon, the evening? So please give us your vote. Fill out the survey when you see it. All input is welcome, whether you're a regular part of the Althea community or not. I was trying to think of what else I had to remind you. Of course, Sundays we're going to have the Sunday gathering, 10:30 a.m. Please invite people. Please be there. It's very fun to do it live. We've had about 130 the last 2 Sundays, and just really, really good feedback. But we're doing this for you. I'm doing this for you. So please let me know what's on your mind. Let me know what you want to hear more about. And so we can make the Thursday live experience better for you, Sunday better, set up classes at the times that work for you. And then, of course, also you're welcome to look at the Althea Facebook page for more information. And, of course, certainly you can find me online as well. So, having said all that, this is your chance. Send me any questions, and I will otherwise just be rambling for the next 10 minutes until we wrap up. Spiritual immersion is what I recommend to transform what you're going through into something transformative that you will always be grateful for, and always look back on with gratitude. So find an author, dive into their work. I am actually revisiting one of my favorite teachers, Sri Ramakrishna. You can do whatever you want. I also love Leo Tolstoy. This is just one of the greatest collections. And believe it or not, long before anybody was doing, collected daily, quotes and readings, Leo Tolstoy actually gathered them in this extraordinary calendar of wisdom. I love this book. Another favorite is Black Elk. I've been rereading Black Elk. That's another great one. I don't recommend necessarily The Sacred Pipe, although I think that's fine. One second, I'm going to get you some other books that I'm reading and loving right now. Woohoo! I'm diving in. Someone asked me what I was reading, sent me a personal email, so I'm going for it. I love collections when we're going through something like this, right? Collected prayers, collected readings, and this is a way that you can, kind of sprinkle connection throughout your day. So you start in the morning and you read a little and you sit and you meditate a little. Then with your next meal, right? With each meal, you pray, you pull out a reading, you return again and again and again as much as you need to remind you that there is no such thing as empty space. There is no such thing as empty space. It is filled with power and potential and opportunity. Now, here's some other stuff I really love. David Suzuki. I got to tell you, if any of you are environmentalists or environmental lovers, just dive into everything David Suzuki. When I talked about creating a calendar, and there was someone who asked a question about my daily schedule, so I'm going to answer that in a question, or in a second. One of the things I recommend is that you take some time to learn, give yourself a project, and diving into nature and the environment is, of course, the project I recommend the most. Also, I think it was in one of my own newsletters, I sent out some information about free classes with the University of Arizona and the Andrew Weil Program for Integrative Medicine. This would be a great time to study nutrition, great time to study health. I also love this guy's books, The Tao of Daily Life, and Derek Lin is his name. He's got a couple of really great collections of Taoist stories, and this might sound really weird, but it's almost like he and I share a brain. So if you kind of like what we do at Althea, you'll love what he's doing. Ramakrishna is constantly begging you to return very simply to a direct relationship with the One. And then I want to get back to the question about schedule. All right, so I'm going to take a little breath here. Yes, I do have a daily schedule. Now, in my case, I have a family that I'm home with. So what we've done is we've actually we had a little whiteboard lying around. I put some holes in the wall in a very prominent place, something I wouldn't have done otherwise, and we've hung it where everyone can see it. My wife, my son, my daughter doesn't read yet, but you come down in the morning and before you get to breakfast, it's right there. We've divided it up by the hours of the day, so from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., and then lines across, and then what each of us is doing. Now, for my son, we have created a regular schedule, and that's based on some recommendations from his school. And what it does is it kind of breaks the day into increments of hours, and it ensures that there's a good mix of time for study, time for creativity, time for, sorry, I'm reading some of the posts, time for relaxing, time for games. Yeah, he's getting his screen time more than usual, and we're encouraging screen time where he's in community, so playing and connecting with other kids live, and what it does is it gives the mind a container. So I think it was Mark Scott that asked the question. One of the principles that is absolutely critical as you mature on the spiritual path is to understand that all human experiences of infinite energy thrive with conscious containment. All experiences of infinite energy in the human life thrive with conscious containment, which is your mind can go anywhere, right? Your emotions can run endlessly, especially when you have too much time on your hands. It can actually be almost torture, the amount of freedom that we have to do nothing. And so when you create a schedule or a calendar, it helps you move energy. So now some people are sharing questions about, what about feeling bored? What about feeling lazy? Well, I think that the question about scheduling is critical because you've got to put your schedule first and then evaluate yourself. Because if you haven't taken time to create a fair container for yourself, then there's really no way that you'll know where the boredom is coming from. Now, having said that, there are also some notes on how to fill the day. If you scroll through our Facebook posts, I put up kind of a quarantine daily recommendations, so that might also be helpful. And then finally, to finish answering the question about schedule, I have to balance my schedule with my wife. We are both teaching online. In fact, right now, she's in another room teaching a live yoga class to people in Spain. So we negotiate the night before. What do we need to accomplish? So we put in the priorities, my calls with people from Althea, my appointments relating to work and so on, my classes with you. And then we build around that, what we need. So I include time with kids, time for meditation and self-care, time for exercise, time for preparing meals and being together as a family, and so on. But let's go. We have time for maybe just a couple more. And this one, so I love this post and I'm grateful. Sarma, you posted it so everyone knows this is you. You didn't hide. But there are some core, deep human dimensions that are going to show up during this. And it's important that we love them and give space for them. So, first of all, grief. And grief is something we're going to go into. Actually, grief is something I'll be talking about on and off over the next week. But many of us, when we stop doing and unplug, we must grieve. And what we're grieving is not just the loss of what's normal. But if you've read my book, Inspiration Deficit Disorder, I'm trying to grab it desperately here, then what you know is that much of how we spend our time, I'm looking for a picture in this book to show you, much of how we spend our time is habit. And it could be fulfilling, it could be wonderful, it could be beautiful, it could be good for us, and so on. And nevertheless, if it becomes something unconscious that we do to feel acceptable and lovable and so on, then we're kind of stuck. Now, I'm looking for this model here, but there's a page where we show all these little behaviors that feed the self system or the persona system. And the problem with that is whenever a hook, a habit, a self system feeding behavior is taken from us, then we must face, here it is, then we must face the energy that put it there in the first place. And that typically means that we lost something, there was wounding, there was some kind of absence in life or wholeness that led us to believe that we needed to pick up a behavior or habit, a way of being, right? That's the puppet out there, to compensate for how we're feeling. And so we develop all these qualities and habits and so on. And yet, if they're not true to who we are, then when they get pulled away, if there's too much dependence on those things to distract us or keep us busy, then grief will absolutely show up. Now, there's another thing that's going to show up, which is dissatisfaction with who we are when we are in quarantine. And that can come from a variety of things. That can come primarily from what I would call the shadow. In other words, aspects of ourselves that we don't allow. Letting ourselves be lazy, letting ourselves be worried. Someone just told me that everything I'm showing you is backwards. I don't know what to tell you. It's forwards to me. But for many of ourselves who have created a very positive idea of self in the world, it can be very hard to experience the self not being that. And that means that you're getting stuck at that second layer. Oh, I found my true self and I express it. And this is why, going right back to the beginning of our talk, there's such deeper work to do, which is being able to love ourselves when we are not good, when we are not energized, when we are not being of service. This is an amazingly important and life-changing capacity to love yourself as you are, even when you don't like yourself as you are. When you can move to that place, it becomes greater or easier to then do something about it if, in fact, as Danielle is reminding us, is if, in fact, you move from awareness and allowance into intuition, and the intuition says, I need to change this. But I'm going to tell you, there are thousands of people out there right now that if only they could just sit with awareness and allowance, they would realize that they are finally finding the time to grieve so many things that they have never slowed down enough to feel. That they are finally being something unhelpful, unengaged, unsignificant, unimportant, that they've never allowed themselves to be. And that is a absolutely critical experience. Because if the spiritual journey is only rooted in authenticity and only in a self that the world loves, then it is an incomplete journey. The journey must contain everything always. That is the nature of the eternal self at the core. We are as spirit, and our consciousness and capacity to love ourselves as we are, to hold all things as they are, is the starting point of change, not the end point. So I'm going to wrap up. I don't see any other big questions here. I'm going to just double check that I kind of covered all these things. I see. One last thing. So someone also mentioned, well, what if I understand I'm supposed to be reading and learning Tai Chi and knitting blankets for the homeless and so on, but I just don't feel like it. You've got to start where you are. And that means that if what you need first is self-care and nurturing and slowing down and just letting yourself experience the fullness of your experience, which might include grief, which might include laziness, which might include... All you need to do to work with that, and this goes back to the question about schedules, is to give yourself a time frame. The mind, remember, infinite dimensions of life thrive with conscious containers. So you give yourself a conscious container and you say, if I'm just feeling pissy and miserable, I'm going to let that happen for a week. That feels reasonable. If I'm feeling grumpy and cheated by life, I'm going to give myself 2 days just to go for it. No judgment, no limits, just accept that that's what I need to feel. Stay connected to the broader perspective so I don't make destructive decisions, but let myself feel. Create time containers by the day, by the week, and over time, and you'll find that the power of those difficult feelings is diminished. So, with that, We're going to finish with a Hafiz poem that I love, and it's called, well, Daniel Ladinsky's title for it is "We Might Have to Medicate You," which is just like a hilarious title for a poem. And yes, someone just posted, sometimes it helps me to schedule time for grief and sadness. And that's what I'm talking about. You know, if something's coming up, don't judge it. Just give yourself time. And if you're afraid it's going to go on endlessly, well, so schedule an end time for it. Like, I'll indulge this for whatever it is, a few hours, an hour, a couple of days, a week. You do that. Stay connected to the broader perspective, but you've got to feel to heal. Okay, no more distractions from questions. We're all going to get together again soon. I'll see you on Sunday, I hope. And then also, don't forget to fill out the questionnaires. Donations are welcome. And help us to understand when we can offer classes so you will enjoy and attend them. All right, ready to sign out? Let's take a breath. Slowing down. Listening for silence. And letting all the mental chatter and emotional responses to what's been shared pass. In this moment, let us remember the radiant, infinite energy that we are, that lives inside us. And close with this beautiful, beautiful poem by Hafiz, translated over the years by Daniel Ladinsky. Resist your temptation to lie by speaking of separation from God. Otherwise, we might have to medicate you. In the ocean, a lot goes on beneath your eyes. Listen. They have clinics there too, for the insane, who persist in saying things like, I am independent from the sea. God is not always around, gently pressing against my body. But God is always all and only what is. So with that, I release you to your day, and whatever activities or non-activities you embrace, remember to invite Spirit into your life. And thank you for joining us here at the Althea Center online and live. Catch you Sunday.